Sorry if you can't get into the classroom at the moment. My apologies. I have no idea why it is not working at this moment. But we're going to continue on anyway. So I'm going to turn to the camera and say, hi, Mike Koplitz with the Royal Rook Scholastic Chess Club, York, Pennsylvania. And we're going to be taking a look at a lesson. And as I've said before, that I like to use textbooks to help with the lesson, and then using programs like the Aquarium program that you see on the screen right now. I'm going to have to spend just a moment setting up the board. I do use a DGT board. I really like my DGT boards. It's very easy to set up positions. It's very easy to put things out there, to make changes and analysis at different times. The software is Aquarium with the Houdini engine. The Houdini engine I have is a couple years old, but since none of us are 3,200 players, I don't see a real problem with using it. And okay, we got some errors on the screen there, but everything looks like it's working. And I have the position on the DGT board. So let me come here to the DGT board, get my cursor over here, and I'm going to go to board, position. I'm going to get it from the DGT. There it is. All right, there's the position. Now, this is coming from a book, and I hope you can see it. Crucial Chess Skills for the Club Player, Volume 1, Robert Rees, page 162. You can see I've gone quite a bit in here. And what we're looking at is a Bobby Fischer game against Alessio Gaudio. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, and my really sincere apologies to all of you who know that I'm saying it wrong. What's happening here is White is going to create a target to attack. D5 knight looks great. Bishop on E7. There's the knight. There's the bishop. This looks like a good knight. It's a beautiful outpost against the bad bishop. Also, notice that D6 pawn is very, very vulnerable. It's backward. So we already have a target. Now, looking at this without reading any of the text, you can see White needs another target to go after. So we'll see how Bobby has created that second target. White's move was rook to A1. So Bobby, according to the book, is going to be looking at F7 down here. It looks like there's a potential target there, but right now he's going to go this way with A1. So White's shifting his attention to the queen side. He was working on the king side. His opponent decided to do F6. Again, strengthening E5. I don't know why he would really want to do it. It's kind of I think it's a bad move because it blocks in this bishop. This bishop now is pretty much useless. And especially against that good knight that's sitting on D5. That's just incredible. So Bobby does A4. He's going to do a little queen side attack now. And Black decides to go rook to B8. Oh, let me turn the analysis on because I forgot to turn that on. We'll give it a second to run here. 7.08. So White is up 7 points. That's 7 pawns equivalent. Knight takes e7 check. That's the computer's recommendation. That's what Bobby did. And the reason is because queen takes e7. And then, of course, you probably saw this instantly. Queen to d5, check, and there goes the rook. So white's going to win this game pretty quickly, obviously, even if he blocks it. It'll only take a second or two. So by creating the new threat on the queen side, Fischer was able to get his opponent to make a mistake. And when he moved that rook, let's see if I put the position back. Let me put the position back where it was. I believe this was it. And like I said, what I like about the DGT board is I just have to go get the position. So when the rook moves to b8, I guess I should bring that pawn back. Let me just get you the position again so you got the right one. There we go. By moving the rook to b8, well, first white does a4 and then b8. Notice this rook here is en prise. It's not protected. It has absolutely no protection. And that's what allows the knight takes e7, because you'd say, why am I trading off a good knight for a bad bishop? Well, that's because once the queen moves, d5 becomes open for the fork, and that check. That's what that's all about. Why don't we go ahead? If you're in the book 164, this is a full game. So let me set up the pieces on the board, and then we can analyze a full game. How about if we do that? Sorry, it takes a minute to put the pieces back on the board. Be nice if the DGT was also computerized, that it could do it for me. Okay, so we'll go get the position. I'm going to get it from the DGT. We're going to start at move. I got to put it this way, move 1. Of course, white moves first. I'm going to allow castling on all sides. There we go. And confirmed. Okay, we continue to look at weak squares and good pieces. As you saw, that d5 knight was very beautifully placed. This is a game between Sergey as white and Anand as black in Baden-Baden in 2012. So let me get some of the moves up on the board for us. E4, C5, the Sicilian, F3, D6. The Moscow variation comes in. D7 variation. D4. Open Sicilian, pawn takes pawn. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. If you're new to chess, you need to learn a few of the openings so you have some idea of what's going on. You don't have to get too deep into it. And let me take this last move back, because I went too fast. I do knight takes pawn with it, like instinctively. Queen takes d4. The queen came out to d4 because the knight, this knight cannot jump into c6 and push the queen away. So the queen's in the way. It's going to inhibit things just a little bit for black. A couple more moves. This is standard stuff. C4. Setting up a Maroczy bind. D3. Whoops. and then h6. Maroczy bind is when d4 and c4 are occupied by pawns, so there's no way for this d pawn to come forward without it being lost. That's a Maroczy bind. And I just made a move by touching the board. Let me fix that. Okay. So white continues c3, f6, castle. And nobody's moving. That looks better. Bishop e7, a4, b6. Now the computer's giving white a half pawn advantage. That's normal because white gets the first move. Remember, part of the game in the opening and the beginning of the middle game is for black to equalize out the position. That's what you're looking to do. Game continues. b3. Rook a7. Now b3 is kind of interesting because I think that's going to be a small potential weakness. It's a backward pawn. It's kind of like d6, a backward pawn. But again, these guys are grandmasters, so I'm not sure why they did that, but they did. Rook to d1, so the pressure is starting to build up on d6. Bishop to c8. Well, you want to get some protection on d6, that's one way to do it. Bishop to a3. So now you see the attack on d6. Bishop, the queen, the rook. Well, right now, the bishop and the queen are protecting, so black's got to do something about that. So after bishop a3, he does rook to d7, which makes perfect sense. Black is defending, white is attacking. The black pieces look very cramped in the center. White's pieces can flow pretty easily at this point, and very nicely. Knight to d2. That's actually given an exclamation point in the book, but no explanation of why. So let's go back and look real quick. Computer makes no change here. You notice pretty much 0.6, 0.7 the whole time. Black castles. Knight to f1. Bishop b7, just like the computer says. Knight to e3, just like the computer says. Rook to e8. Game's still pretty much the same. Knight on c to d5. So the knight going from d2, from f3, d2, f1, e3, was to get the outpost of d5. Knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. Now, you don't take it back with the pawn. If you take it back with this pawn, you got an open file that black can have counterplay on. If you take it with the e4 pawn, then this pawn, the e5, starts coming forward and causing you trouble. So you have to take it back with the queen. But the queen's not going anywhere. You can't toss the queen out of d5. And she's really centered on the board. Pretty much can't get more centered than that. And the attack can continue on d6. Queen a8. Well, black found a way to try to push the queen out of the way, and white decided to take the queens off the board. Now, this is good for black. Again, that d6 pawn is a problem that he's got to do something about. So you get the queens off the board if you're being attacked. Rook to d5. Again, that outpost, you can't budge that rook. It's going to sit there. So let's see what happens. If you're going to learn how to play Sicilian, this is a very bad pawn structure for you to be in right now, because that d6 is going to be a sore thumb. You've also got a bad bishop on e7, where white's bishop on a3 can move around a little bit. So you really want to avoid these kind of structures. f6. Rook A to D1. Rook A to A8. I'm sorry, D8. Notice the attack. And at this point, black's immobilized. He's kind of done here at the moment to a sit and wait game. So G3, G5. Black has weakened his king side. He's got another two backward pawns. He probably should have looked for something better. F4. Now, white is going to eventually swing his pieces from this D file and from A3 and come into the king side. He's going to try to shoot in there as fast as he can. G takes F4. Whoops, wrong G takes F4. Let me go back. Yeah, G takes F4. G takes F4. King to F7, king to F2. Now the king's got to get involved with the game. You are in an end game. Remember that your king is worth 5 points. Get it in there, get it going. Yeah, you want to protect it so you don't lose it, but at the same time, remember that a king is also a fighting piece, and you want to use it that way. King to E6. Now bishop to C1. Now the bishop's going to enter the game. And look at that H6 pawn over there. That thing's going to go here soon if black is not careful. So where were we? Now I've lost my place. I shouldn't have been talking so much. I lost my place. All right. Rook C8. And I'm looking for, after Rook C8. Nope. Let me put that back, because that isn't the move. E takes F4. King to F3. No big rush here. King is on E6. Bishop to C1. Rook then to C8. Bishop takes F4. Bishop to F8. So stopping here just for a second. Look at the bishop. Whoops. I didn't want to do that. Should be able to erase that. The bishop on F4, I'll just point to it instead of lifting them up, is attacking here on H6. And I did it again. Sorry about that. And it's attacking D6. So your bishop is doing a double attack. This bishop is doing a double defense way back here. I can touch that one easily. White right now has the upper hand. So let's see what happens. H4 was played. C6, Rook C6. H5. Whoops. It didn't catch that. On a DGT board, you also have to lift the pieces, and I pushed the piece, which was wrong. So it registered on the wrong square. Now, take a note of H5. Why is this a good move? Because that pawn on H6 can't move, and the bishop's attacking it. It can't move to a white square. Grandmaster and world champion Capablanca said, you want to put your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop so that your bishop has places to roam and can move. Black's bishop is pretty well toasted. It's stuck where it is. Let's see what he does. Rook to b7. I don't think black has a whole lot of moves here. Just what does he do? He's just going to move a little bit, and maybe he's just hoping for his opponent to make a mistake. So I said rook to b7. The bishop then came to e3. So now it's attacking the b6 pawn. So now the bishop is tying down a rook. The bishop is tying down the rook. Almost like an exchange sacrifice, but not quite, but close. Rook to b8. And then he did bishop to d4. Rook to c7. Rook to g1. And now white is going to start coming down. He's going to invade the king's side through that open G file. You should be able to see that pretty easily. Whoops. So the bishop comes to G7. And the rook comes to G6, attacking that F6 pawn. Now the rook has to come to F7 because it has to do a defense. The bishop now comes to E3. And now notice that F6 pawn. It's now under attack. Rook to D7. The rook comes to F5. Remember that F6 pawn is weak. I mean, look at all of these are weak. The D6, the F6, the H6, they're all weak. They're all hard to defend. And white is just attacking them. And eventually, black's not going to be able to hang on to every one of his pawns. It's just not going to happen. So rook to F7. King to G4. Yep, we're good. Bishop F8. And that takes care of that. Exchanges off this bad bishop, which is totally worthless to him. But now white is up a passed pawn. Not the best position because the rook should be behind pawns that are being pushed. But hey, you got to take what you can get. Rook check. And the king scoots. Rook to F8. Because that F6 pawn is still a problem that has to be defended. A5. Rook to G1. So black's going to try to create some counterplay by coming in from behind. It's understandable. A takes B6. Rook to B1. B7. Rook takes B3. E5 with an exclamation point. Let's take that back for a second. Go forward. Well, let's see what happens. D takes E5 check, just like the computer says. Rook takes E5 check. And you can do that if you notice that the F6 pawn is pinned. I was wondering, wait a minute, you can't take that pawn, that's check. But this pawn here is pinned, it can't go anywhere. Very nicely done. King to D6. Rook to F5, so that pawn's going to drop in a second. So the king's got to come back to E6. Rook to H7, he's got to protect That pawn that's sitting on b7, that's so beautifully sitting there, needs to do something. So far, so good. And now we get into the end of the game. And I lost my place. I'm sorry. I'm looking up going, oh, this is so fascinating that I lost my place. There it is. Rook to d8. Just to d8. Notice White's point count is starting to skyrocket. And then he does rook to d5. Now, Black resigns. Let's look at why he's resigning. Wow, look at the point count up here. 11, that's a queen and 2 pawns. So what's he going to do? Well, I think we should look at rook takes d5 because that to me looks the most logical. C takes d5 check. Now it says you can't take the pawn. The computer is saying you cannot take the pawn. Notice that. What I like about, like I say, the DGT is I can say, well, what happens if I do? So let's play what the computer said, h6. Got 2 pawns making their way forward. So we'll play the computer's move out. Rook to g7. That's about toast. I don't see how you can avoid this. b4 check. b5 check. That's logical. Take pawn. Rook b1 because he's going to try to do a whole bunch of behind the scene check. h7 isn't mattering because the king is eventually going to hide. And there the computer comes up with mates. We let it calculate long enough, I might find a better one. That's logical. I would come g6. There's your mates again. g1. The reason is because I'm going to get behind this rook. Takes. Takes. Makes sense. You can't stop the queens from coming. Obviously, queen. Let's find the queen. I mean, this is kind of the end of the end. Takes. And we all know this is going to be a checkmate at this point. f7. Even if you shoot the pawn forward, it doesn't matter. See where they want to put the queen. Up, king to e6. I don't think we have to go too much further here to know that this is going to happen. Right? Go this way. I would bring my king this way. He's going to try to look for a draw here. He's going to try to look for something. He's going to play a trick. So you guys that are scholastic players need to be careful. He's looking for a stalemate. He's looking for you to make a mistake. You always have to give the king a square to move to. Right now, the king can move to, and it's showing you, b6. That's a mistake. Notice this, the analysis went blank because the game's over. You must remember, always, always, always give him a square to move to. Computer saying go to b6. Now he's got to move his king. There's only one place to go. And now you can go to b3. Now he has to go behind his pawn. See, he's got plenty of room. He can go to C. He's going to go to c7, a7, and of course, there's mate. So be careful. I'm glad we went through the rest of the game. The book stops with where the resignation occurs. but we continued on because what we see is be careful of stalemates. Very, very, very careful. All right. Well, you guys take care. I'm glad you came to watch the live. I'm sorry the classroom didn't work. I will take a look at that and fix that for next week. Take care. Happy chess. Chess.com. A whole bunch of other places you can play live chess. And I'm out. If I can find the stop stream button, which I can't.